everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by my friends over at a company called Real Mushrooms, realmushrooms.com. Sky Chilton and his father, Jeff Chilton. I interviewed Jeff a number of episodes ago. Really interesting guys. I really enjoyed that conversation with Jeff. And it's a company that sells and distributes medicinal mushrooms in powder or capsule form. I was really happy to have these guys come on. I think they were very much in alignment with the values of the podcast. As you all know, a big part of this podcast is about plant medicine, holistic medicine, and I think the benefits of medicinal mushrooms are truly fantastic, and I think there's really a growing body of work that's really showing and alluding to all of the amazing properties that mushrooms have. They sell a lot of different mushrooms, things you've probably heard of, like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. Those are all mushrooms I work with. They're part of what I consider for myself a really holistic supplement regime. And the thing I really love about their company, not only are they really good guys, I think they're really ethical guys, but the product is really amazing. It's all 100% mushrooms. They're organic, and that's really rare. For better or for worse, the supplement industry is highly unregulated, and so often when you get supplements, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. You may be getting some mushroom, you may be getting a bunch of fillers and other things. Oftentimes, even when you're buying what may be a mushroom, it may not have any of that mushroom in it at all, unfortunately. Even some of the big, I think even the biggest company that sells mushrooms, actually it's not the fruiting body, not the mushroom itself. It's the mycelial, which is grown on grain, and then those things are mixed up and then sold in a supplement form. So not only are you not getting the mushroom itself, you're getting the mycelium mixed with grain. So it's one of the amazing things at Real Mushrooms is it's exactly that. It's real mushrooms. So it's 100% mushrooms, organic. So you're getting a really good product. You're getting the actual fruiting body, the mushroom itself, 100% of that. And again, just really great guys. I'm really happy to have them on and supporting this podcast. So if you'd like a really good product, you'd like to start working with medicinal mushrooms, check out their site, realmushrooms.com. And also listeners of this show, if you go to their site, realmushrooms.com/universe, you get 25% off your first order, which is a really good deal. And I think once you start working and tasting their products, you'll really see and feel a big difference. So thank you to them. And I think that's it. And without further ado, here is the intro to the show. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Dmitry Alexeev. Dmitry is a scientist who specializes in the gut microbiome. So it was really interesting to sit down and talk to him. It's a subject I've been wanting to delve into for a while in this podcast. It's something that I find very fascinating, and especially working with plants and natural medicine. It's really a big part of this work, very much in the scientific way, but also in the philosophical way, even in the spiritual way, the cosmovision, which we talked about a bit in this podcast, this idea that we have other life forms within us that are affecting us, that are affecting our health, that are affecting our mood, and even our intelligence. So we got into some really interesting topics all about the gut microbiome, what are microbes, kind of the history in the Western world, how those kind of relate to certain indigenous cosmovisions as well, how plants affect that, especially working with some power plants, how that can relate to that, a lot of the science of the gut microbiome, what's being discovered and talked about, and how it's really an emerging field that's I think a really important part of science and just humanity and health and well-being, and also really getting to this idea of what does it mean to be human and what does it mean to be conscious. So it was a really beautiful conversation. I think we went 3 hours, which again for me is always a sign of a really good conversation. So I hope you all enjoyed this podcast. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. It's a website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. You can sign up for different tiers, and those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. So if you feel like you're gaining something from this podcast, that's a really beautiful way to practice this idea of reciprocity, of giving back, and then also getting certain things back from doing that as well. To all the patrons, to all the people who are supporting via Patreon, as always, thank you very much for your support. It really means a lot, and it's really what allows me to continue making these episodes. If you're not able to do that, as always, helping with the algorithms is a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, leaving any questions or comments in the comment section. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, following the show and leaving a starred rating, and also on Apple Podcasts a short review, that's a really big help. So I think that's it. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Dmitry.
Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
We were talking a little bit before we started, but a big part of this podcast is working with plants and nutrition and life and consciousness. And I've actually never had someone on this podcast to talk about this subject, which is interesting because we were speaking. I mean, I think I'm 120 some episodes in now. So this is a long time overdue, because I think your work is actually really vital to our understanding of us as humans, of life, of what we put into our body, of how our body works. So maybe just to start, you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what the work that you do is, and how you got interested in this kind of work.
Jason, everyone, really, really nice that you're having me on the podcast. I'm like a real hardcore scientist. So this means I've been working in like very standard labs where people wear lab coats and stuff. And I've been a scientist for 20 years now. My main focus was all kinds of microbial stuff. So it's mainly bacteria. And in this area, microbiome has been a buzzword for almost like 15 to 20 years now. And well, I would say that me personally, I was always interested in the phenomena of consciousness, and it got together with my science career. I was a lot into Buddhism and meditation, and that's where I decided it's a great thing to study how the brain is, whatever it's doing, receiving, producing, transmitting consciousness. And and it was funny that at some point, like in the lab where I was working, I came to understanding that the apparatus that I have, all of the appliances, all of the techniques, they are not sophisticated enough to study the brain. And then I started to downgrade in complexity. So these were like typical organs, and then it's like also too complicated. And so we came down to bacteria, which is probably one of the most simplest like forms of life, which then evolved in everything that we have now. And I got stuck with bacteria for 20 years now. And I mean, all of this, like first studying them just like single cells, and then going into the consortia of these bacteria, also living on a specific surface. So most of my scientific work was gut microbiome and its connection to health. And now I'm sure everybody has at least heard that it's so much connected not only with digestion per se, but also with immunity. And a lot of stuff has been lately done on the mental health and gut microbiome connection. And the more deeper I got into that, the more I started to understand that, like, our, let's say, common consciousness, like the whole population consciousness, how we feel ourselves, how we express ourselves, how we communicate, is very much dependent on our health state. And that's so much connected with what's going on with our micro world, with this microcosmos of bacteria. And probably I'm now one of those people who's like really preaching this idea that by understanding more about microbiome and microbes, we can make a better health. And then through this better health, we can even get like better populations or better generations, also in terms of mental health. And then through these, we can reach like a much higher states of consciousness, like taken together. And a lot of my work has been connected with studying kind of all types of cultural, historical, anthropological approaches to health. And really, if we want to understand how our gut is supposed to work, we have to find some populations who live quite far away from the supermarket. Yeah, we have to understand how people are designed to digest, to keep health, how we are designed to feed ourselves, what's the evolution behind that. So I started to be interested into indigenous people and indigenous cultures. And also through that and many other friends who were around, I realized that, for example, South America has a great culture of indigenous approaches to health, which if we really take a kind of more scientific approach to that, then we can see a lot of connection with the microbial world. But then again, other systems, other kind of established health systems like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine, or many others which are just much smaller, they're also like the practical approaches to becoming healthier. They're so much connected to indeed how you keep the balance of microbial world inside of you and outside of you. So then again, we talked a bit in the beginning about traditional approaches in the South America and some of the medicinal plants. And I believe a lot of the effects that we see on the health, they're so much connected with how this is interacting on this microbe-human interface. So, for example, tobacco. This is one of my insights, probably from already as many as 10 years ago, that I realized when the traditional tobacco was applied to the mucus, either like upper respiratory tract, or if you find a real tabacero, like a doctor who's using tobacco as a medicine, he could even apply the liquid tobacco like into your mucus of the digestive tract, and then the effects that would produce on the mucus, that's exactly what's regulating the connection of the microbes inside of you with your physical body. And then that's probably one of the ways to kind of, with all of these medicines, that's maybe one of the ways how you restart the communication process between you and your bacteria. And then at a certain point, for example, I learned about techniques which are called la dietas. So that's like really using single plant for a period of time. In scientific world, we call it an intervention. So that's kind of lasting intervention into human health. And normally, like in science, we would use the pharmaceutical substances in this context. But then again, if you take a plant from the wild and you try to, for example, eat it for a month, like for a 30-day, which is maybe like a typical example of the dieta. Sometimes people could do that for years, probably. So if we look into the biochemistry of that, so what's happening, that's human is not only learning the influence of the chemical substances, polyphenols inside of the plant of choice, but it also is training his inner microbes to digest it specifically. So it's in a way, every time we use the plant for inside the digestive system, the plant is just the source material, and most of the effect will be opened through the connection with the microbes. So they will be digesting it into the hundreds of bioactive substances, which will be then influencing your body. And it's not only the brain for consciousness, and actually sometimes it's not specifically the brain. A lot of science we see now behind the plant-based medicine, that it's like stepwise. Microbes can extract from the plant something, some of the biochemical that would go into the liver, for example, and then it will be transformed in the liver, and then this substance will activate different cells, and cells would produce something like growth factor for your neurons, and then you will become like the brain will become more fluid. You can make new synapses, new connections inside the brain. So that's like neuroplasticity as the whole, which will be summoned in the beginning by the plant. And then just to finish the short intro, at certain point, I mean, one of the cultural things we human have is called fermentation. So this is a culture, we see the footprints of fermentation something like 7 to 10 years, 10 to 10,000 years ago. So people around the world, they have different approaches, different ways of fermenting stuff. And probably when a lay person thinks about fermentation, he would think about milk or something like that. But actually people around the world, they ferment everything. And if we look at the traditional medicines, again, tobacco, for example, that's normally fermented substance. So they would how do you call it? They would squeeze the leaf or put it underground. So the juice of the leaf would initiate the fermentation of the tobacco leaf. And unless it's happening, the plant will not have its power. So that's part of the preparation process. And I would say, I remember one of these nights, I think it was in Ecuador in the jungle, or maybe in Colombia, that I realized that a lot of this kind of tiny mythological creatures, which you would meet in different cultures, that was maybe a way of our ancestors to see the microbial world. So these little helpers, which would be everywhere in every epos, yeah, of around the world. You would see, and people think that there is somebody unseen who does a lot of good for you. And then again, spirits. Yes, the spirits probably are this unseen entities who do good and bad. Yeah, and that's, for example, in our European culture, that's how we thought about disease. something unseen that was causing diseases. And then for many cases, we realized that's the microbial world. But these like this really kind of resonates, like this understanding of unseen entities bringing certain results, good and bad. So for many cases, you would find explanations and mechanics and biochemistry exactly in the microbial world. So that's the whole field. Probably we'll be talking about today. Let's see where it leads us.
Yeah, amazing, Dmitry. There's a lot of stuff there. I'd love to talk to you more in depth about. Maybe to go into just to kind of start. Before we started, you mentioned you kind of gave on another interview a kind of a history of the microbiome, of microbes, of bacteria. You said it turned into almost 2 hours, so maybe we won't try and go that long. But and I know it's a big question, but I think these are terms that a lot of people are familiar with. They've heard of. They have some understanding of that. But could you speak a little bit about whether it's the more kind of standardized history, or maybe even a history that you have some intuitive sense into based on your work? But what are microbes? What are bacteria? What are viruses? What are parasites? And how did these things form? And how did they begin to form this relationship with humans? Because it's something that I think even 50 years ago, most of humanity, or at least maybe in the kind of quote unquote Western world, people weren't so familiar with this idea that even humanity is comprised of billions, if not trillions of bacteria, of microbes that actually affect us. Like we're not just purely human. We have this symbiotic relationship with this kind of unseen world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do regularly is I talk to kids, like in different settings, and I have a few books for the kids, just like about the natural history, what's the digestion, what are microbes, how brain is working. And one of things that I see is working for them is explaining, like we have this picture of the clock, which is like just like 12 hours scale, and then or it's like 1 hour scale. That's very standard picture. And then probably after 15 to 20 minutes, and that's existence of our planet. That's the time of the existence of our planet. Let's imagine that our planet existed for an hour. And then probably around 15 to 20 minutes into the life, our planet's first life appeared on the planet. So before that, that was like complete silence. And I mean, we have two theories of how life could have appeared. One of the theory that it was like this was like, just like emerging, starting to build up complexity, the primordial soup thing, or the other theory that the life is more like extraterrestrial stuff, something like a small bite of life in form of bacteria or DNA arrived with a meteorite. But anyway, I mean, somewhere in the lifetime of the universe, life just appeared, as we know that this form of life, which is based on DNA. And then for the next 20 minutes, these were only microbes. These guys, the bacteria, yeah, we call them the archaea, like the primordial bacteria, the most ancient ones. They were living on the sources of heat from the internal part of the planet, and they were using some of the chemicals which are kind of really stuff that, for example, for us now would be like a poison. and they were terraforming, they were transforming the planet. So quarter of life of this planet, these were only microbes, and these were the guys who actually created the atmosphere. So really the possibilities for us to live and really to produce energy in the way that we do. So inside every cell of the more complex being on the planet, there is this effects of burning. Yeah, so we use oxygen to burn fats or to burn carbohydrates. So the oxygen wasn't there from the beginning. This was the work of the first microbes. And then these last 20 minutes, this is very rapid evolution and creation of more complex and complex species. And let's say kids are really kind of attracted to dinosaurs. So I tell them, like, dinosaurs appeared like only 3 minutes ago, 3 minutes till the end of the hour, and probably like 20 to 30 seconds till the end of the hour, dinosaurs died off. And for us human, that's only lasts 5 seconds that we're on the planet. And how funny it is for us to think that that we are part of this planet, that we are able to govern anything, that we are able to control anything. So this planet is really the microbial world, and every new more sophisticated form of life, it was always developing together with microbes. So it's like it's impossible that you have a sterile environment for anything. So from the first moment baby appears, they will have the juices of the vaginal juices of the mother, which already have the microbes, and these are very specific microbes prepared by vagina. So the baby will be populated from the inside and from the outside by protective microbes, and that's the way to survive. That's the only way to survive. And the same will be with the seed of a plant. Yeah, that's also covered in something like a shell. And every plant, every leaf you can see outside, you have something very green behind you. So every leaf of the plant is covered with myriads of different microbes, and the microbes you will have on this leaf, they are also protecting the leaf, because it's always about balance. Yeah, so if you don't have this microbial protection, you will be eaten up. Like this matter will be just eaten up by the microbial world. One of the characteristics of the microbes, that they're very capable of multiplying themselves. So whatever we see when a person is sick with something, let's say pathogenic, it's either virus or infectious bacteria, it's just something out of control, which is just multiplying itself inside the cells, outside of the cells. And because it's taking a lot of the resources from the place where it lives, for example, our lungs or our intestine, the organ will be damaged. So not to kind of protect this, we have the long evolution of our body together with the microbes, where every generation there was a selection for the better combination of microbes and whatever our, let's say, first ancestors, probably for us, like first, like all of this, you can imagine all these myriads of dinosaurs, then small mice, and then up to the monkeys, and then from the monkeys to the humans. That's how we see it in science, that every generation was selecting a better combination of human body and organs and the microbes. So this connection was there from the beginning. And only when we started to really destroy this connection with the, let's say, Western diets and Western approaches to health, like antibiotics, and Western approaches to food preservation with some chemicals which destroy the microbes and all of these other stuff. So through destroying this connection, we started to see the increase in all of these types of chronic diseases and mental health, for example. This is the modern pandemic. It's not the virus. It's the pandemic of anxiety. It's a pandemic of depression. It's very much now attributed to loss of microbial diversity. And diversity, and I would say that if just one thing we have to kind of have as a take-home message from this interview, that's the diversity. And this is such a global word. I mean, like in Amazon, yeah, that's the place for diversity. And I believe you have this understanding and feeling that just living in this diversity is already a medicine. Yeah, that's already amazing. Yeah, and that's probably, if you could imagine, that's the way our internal life, our gut looked much before industrial agriculture and food production appeared. Whenever we compare modern human with the indigenous people, we would see up to twice as much different microbes inside. Not just the amount of biomass, but the diversity of the microbes. And whenever we compare disease with a normal state, we would see that in the disease, the diversity is even less. And that's probably like, this is like a mathematical theory of complexity. Yeah, to have a stable system, you need it to be diverse. If it's monotonous, then will collapse. It's not robust. It's not like, and the diversity is a lot of different agents with different simple interactions inside, and a lot of feedback loops and stuff. That's something like real nature is. That's what's making like a natural forest. But again, that's what's making a natural microbial community inside of us. And with all of this stuff, it's like really like another mindset. If you have this as a value or as a just like a core of your mindset inside your health, you can do a lot of stuff. You can think of a lot of different practices that would enrich your inner world, that would enrich your community, and that other stuff. That's like really different modern understanding. One of the examples in the Western world is this theory, which is called hygiene theory. So this was proposed by pediatric doctors somewhere around 1999, 1998. So they were looking into the phenomena of increasing amount of allergies in children of the Western world. And they were like, wow, what's the reason of it? What's at the core of it? And then they realized that our habits of sanitation, of just like cleaning everything, making everything, like trying to make everything sterile, would really, in this age from 0 to 5, would really weaken the amount of signals, would really destroy this rich interaction of the immune system with the outer world. So that would, like, the immune system had no signals from the outer world because everything was sterile and it wasn't developing. So it's not made up. We are not made up for living in the sterile world. We need to interact with nature. So this is why they called it. It's like being over hygienist made us after a few generations, made us into like really, let's say, sick population. It's not only kids' allergies. I remember working a lot with populations, for example, with syndromes of deficit disorder, which is again one of the more modern pandemics. And a lot of it is probably coming from the food that we eat, from the food that we feed to children, and from the result of undeveloped neural system. It starts with very limited food choices, and then there are a lot of these experiments that I can quote, that I can cite, to show how this like really interestingly working. There are guys in Finland who realized that modern Finnish kids, although like you would think of Finland like country which is like really integrated into nature, but it's really not. Like people who live in the cities, they're not like much into the woods actually. So they brought the boxes of the soil from the forest into the kindergartens for the summer, and they allowed kids to play with the dirt whenever they were coming out to play. And then after 3 months, they measured the result in terms of the microbiome and in terms of the immune system. And they realized that through these 3 months of interacting just with the normal natural dirt, kids improved their microbiome, and they became much more resistant to the allergies, and the immune system became stronger. So it's probably like when you were asking about this, how this Western view, like this Western view is always about thinking of human is something separate from the nature. This is the whole philosophy theories, yeah, like human is something above the nature, and nature is somewhere outside of human, and we have to conquer that. That's some of the typical summaries of the Western philosophies. But it's actually not. Yeah, nature is inside of us. And whenever we try to fight it, whenever we try to destroy the natural principles, we just cut out the feedback loops of our body connected to nature. And through that, it's just becoming unstable. And it's again like that's just mathematically, that's the complex system where you cut a lot of the different connections. It won't be stable. And that's probably the choice for the whole humanity now. Yeah, will we stay or will we go? A lot of people now say the earth will die. And I always say the earth will not die. Maybe we as population will disappear. Maybe current diversity of species is endangered. But for Earth, that's just like another moment in 5 billion's history. That it can be destroyed easily, but it will just grow into another thing, another complexity, another diversity. But we won't be there, yeah? That's the only thing. So that's the choice. The planet is staying, the planet is stable. The planet for me, the planet is like a nuclear reactor inside, which is emitting heat, and a beautiful star above, which is also sending the heat in the form of light. And life is something which is learning how to transform this energy of heat and light into something diverse and beautiful. And sometimes in the history of the planet, there were some of these dead ends, evolutionary dead ends, which never gave any of the results, and the whole branches of evolution died out. Like the dinosaurs are the good example. So it's only for if we talk about the consciousness, it's for us. It's a conscious decision what we want to do. Do we want to be like the dinosaurs for some other species living on this planet billion year after us? Or do we want to grow, to be part of the trunk of the evolution and give more rise to more of the beautiful things possible on this planet?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that's a super important point that I think is important to emphasize, which is this idea that obviously we're human, so we have an anthropocentric worldview, but much as you said, like the world is always stable. It can't not be stable, and as you said, it's just what kind of world do we want to create for us and for those around us, but that ultimately that the Earth is fine. It also, what you were talking about, it reminded me of this very beautiful quote by Louis Pasteur, who was a famous French scientist, and he was really the one. I mean, that's where pasteurization comes from. This idea that microbes are harmful and that we have to eradicate them, and it also, kind of in a larger view, it came from this kind of war on nature, this idea that we had to conquer nature and that we had to eradicate the microbes because they could make us sick, and that's where this idea of pasteurization comes from. But it was interesting because allegedly on his deathbed, he had this quote which. He was speaking to a friend of his, and he said something like that at the end of his life, he realized that the pathogen was nothing and the terrain was everything, which is very much what you're speaking towards. You also mentioned this idea that in order, for you and your research to really understand the microbiome, you really had to look at traditional people. What is the difference when you're studying kind of the traditional microbiome of traditional peoples versus what you see in again, for lack of better words, the Western world, which, isn't just Europe and the US now. It's really most of the world now kind of has a Western diet. So what are the differences that you see in the microbiome, and what do you think are the root causes of that change? And what do you see as being maybe some of the detriment of that?
Yeah, just before before I would go there, comparing the indigenous or like the traditional setting of the human microbe community, or like we call them holobiome. Like together with microbes, we are the whole universe, the holobiome of the human. That's also just to maybe also somehow connected with the traditional approaches to health, that the view of many traditional cultures, and for sure South American a lot into that, it's very different from this Western view where we are separated from the nature. Now, even in science, they discuss it that a lot of scientists now appear. Like, for example, I've been reading a paper from the Maori guys. So these are the guys from Australia. They're typical tribal guys with this specific tattoos on the face, and they are now doing science. And they say that our way of thinking is really different, that we never thought of ourselves as something separate from the nature. The same is with the traditional South American approaches, and probably a lot of medicine is about bringing this mindset back to people, that we are like, whenever you think of yourself as separate from the nature, you start to behave crazily, yeah, and you harm your health. But whenever you like working with the mindset, whenever you cure yourself into this state that you're part of this beautiful planet, then that's a healing, and then your choices and way of life are different. So whenever we compare a modern, more like modern people with the industrial diet and the traditional people, we can see that a lot of microbial species, they have disappeared. So whenever, for example, let's say my ancestors were moving from the village to the city and then adopting the industrial way of eating, diet itself, they would lose a lot of different species which are detrimentally important for health. And I call it for myself the theory of like the industrial food filter of the microbes. So it's in a way, and that's where humanity is really going to, that the modern food is like a filter. And then when whoever is coming with the indigenous richness of the microbes is passing through this filter, and only the microbes that can survive with the environment of the modern food, they will stay when the human passes this filter. And they are not many, I would say, and they are not like most of the beneficial microbes. They are not made into survival mode. They cannot survive, for example, food preservatives. So like sometimes you could imagine a modern milk, a cup of milk. If you leave it on the table, you go for vacation for a month, you come back and it will stay intact. So this literally means that any of the microbes in the air, they're not touching this biological substance because it's full of something. We call it preservatives, like common word. So we are trying to preserve food, but we never. So this means that the microbes are not capable of eating this milk, for example. They will be poisoned if they eat it. So whenever we take this food inside, it will act in the same way on our microbes. So that's kind of modern food, which is made to be preserved for longer times, especially outside of the cold chain. If something is just like staying on the table and it's not rotting, and it's something strange. This means that microbes, for some reason, are not eating that. But these are microbes outside, but the microbes inside will also not eat it. And then you can imagine that up to 100% of the diet could be made up of these types of the foods. This sometimes also interesting with the meat production facilities. Some time ago, they discovered that if we add a little bit of antibiotic into the farm animal, the farm animal would give more meat from the same amount of the feed. So, and if you're a businessman, that's a good thing. For 1 kilo of the feed, you will get more kilos of meat. The only thing you have to do is adding a little bit of antibiotics into that. But on the inner world, what's happening that with the antibiotics, you are poisoning the microbes inside the animal. And then they are not able to digest. They're not taking extra energy from the feedstock, and the animal is getting fat. But these antibiotics are staying inside the meat, and whenever you give it to human, you will also poison them. You will also poison their microbes. And then if you look, for example, at US statistics, which is worldwide known, that's up to 30 and even higher rate of obesity in different states. So that's, in a way, we wanted our animals to become bigger, but as a result, we ourselves are getting bigger. So a lot of these practices at certain point, and sometimes some of these things for the Western world, I think of it as it's like really karma stuff, which is like you treat the animals like this, and this is what you get for your health. Or for example, a lot of discussions now are about sugar. Yeah, and the history of sugar is really a history of slavery. We know the numbers that up to 500,000 of slaves transported from Africa, they died just on the way. They're over there in Atlantic Ocean. And they were transported there because there was high demand for sugar, which was sold as first in the drugstores for the highest prices. And now in our diet, this sugar is like over the roof. Yeah, so probably every developed nation is consuming 3 to 4 times more added sugar than we just need for our normal daily energy expenses, just because we like it, just because it's addictive. And then again, for the whole Western civilization, I think that's just like karma, guys. Our ancestors were killing for that, were transforming the whole nations. They were making slaves to have this sugar, and now as a result, we have again this obesity, type 2 diabetes. That's just the result, and that's in karma. That's always like this. That you want to reach something, but the main advice that's just like be careful with your wishes, yeah, because sometimes they might come true. So we wanted more sugar, now we got it, but that's the result. That's something for our health. And then again, whenever it's about health as the physical health, that's now always about health as the mental health. Can people with the chronic disease think clearly? Can they make their choices? How they feel emotionally? How they communicate? It's obviously much harder for them to have healthy relationships again. So again, when we look into these microbes, just comparing wild populations, and I've been above the polar circle on the north. I've been living with the deer herders to see, and they have the same culture for last 2,500 years. So we can dig out their traditional way of living from 2,500 years, and it's almost similar to it now. And the food is almost similar, and their health is really good. Like I was living with a guy of 65, excellent health. Like he's like a bear, like huge, very good eyesight, very good teeth, very good skin. He had like 15 kids, for example, but the living conditions are so hard that you can have encounter with the wild animals, you can get frozen, you can get whatever, you can get drowned and stuff. Half of his kids, they didn't survive it. So it's in a way, nature is always selecting the fittest subjects there. So whenever you get to the old age, this means that you are one of the like most adopted guys. And then again, in our Western world, we are, due to medical improvement, yeah, we have all types of species with the disease and without the disease. This filter of the modern diseases is not working. Yeah, we're trying to make everybody survive up to a certain age. So again, there will be more fit people who live now up to 100 years and less fit people who live up to like the medium age, be it 65 or 75. But it's what was the most interesting for me. These were the cases of discovering that some of the specific microbes are really important on different stages of life. And this is a lot what we see with the kids. There was a guy in the 80s. He was indigenous guy from Ecuador, but he also got a good education, and he was working for the pharmaceutical company. So he had this theory of that breast milk is able to transport the microbes, very beneficial for the child. And this is part of kind of additional education of the child microbial world from the mother. So at certain point when he went for vacation in Ecuador, he went up into the mountains and he collected the breast milk from indigenous mothers. He brought it to the lab, to his pharmaceutical lab, and he studied the milk. And he found a lot of specific microbes which are very good for children. And then it's already 30, 40 years now into the history of the product, which is like very well known, very well studied probiotic, which is very good for kids. And it appears to me that it was always that mothers would give this microbe to their children inside of the breast milk. And I was again checking the statistics for US. The newborns in US, only 5% of the newborns, they have this specific microbe which guy have discovered in the indigenous milk. So it's in a way, how do you call it in English when parents are giving wife some of the treasures when she's married? We
A
have very
dowry.
huh?
It's called a dowry.
Dairy, yeah. So our
Mhm.
microbes in a way is a dairy, but we're like really losing that. That's not given to us by our mothers or maybe even by our grandmothers to our mothers. So whenever we return this to human life, we're getting a better health results. Guys, actually, and guys in this company who are producing these probiotics, they really understand this meaning of everything. The guys, the probiotic is called BioGaia. So it's like really to make this tribute of this understanding of life. And there are other examples like that. So it's in a way when we transformed into the Western civilization, like living with skyscrapers and supermarkets is something like really good and comfortable. But it's also the way how we prepare the food, how we store it, the whole chain is a little bit corrupted. That's one thing, but also through my experience, and I've been working in US, in Netherlands, in UK. A lot of my work is with the traditional food companies here in Russia and around. So now the mindset of food producers is changing also. So they understand that they want to preserve this even better, even more. You know, like we understand that this type of manufacturing really influences health in a bad way. How can we make it better? You know, like and it's not only about wealth, so not only about money. It's probably this process of waking up is happening globally with the food production, and they're really into researching, trying, experimenting how we can make the same food more nutritious for people. So that's where I'm working at the moment also.
It seems like one of the you mentioned this in the beginning, that this idea of fermentation, and in a lot of more of this westernized or industrialized food production, that seems to be something that's quite lost, and yet it very much, even in more European cultures, it seemed to be one of the staples of diets. Even these things like beer, which we take for granted now, because even most beers are pasteurized, they're filtered, and yet traditionally there was this real art, but I think this also like inherent wisdom that this idea of fermentation was very advantageous to health of taking microbiomes that were in our environments and allowing those to transform foods and then ingesting those into our body. Beer was a really common way, or things like sauerkrauts but it seems like that's something that's really been lost. And many indigenous cultures also had that, like you're mentioning, for example, in the Amazon. And it's something that's really been lost now because a lot of those groups are also moving away from some of those traditional processes. But for example, one of the main foodstuffs in the Amazon was a plant called yucca or cassava. It's kind of like a potato, a bit thicker, a bit hardier. And it was really a traditional foodstuff, and you could eat it, you could make it kind of into a bread. But the most common way that it was used was it was made into a liquid and then fermented. And interestingly, it was actually fermented by women who would sit around and chew the yucca and then spit it. There's all sorts of jokes with that. It depends on which women which is the most attractive or who makes the best, this drink, which it has many different names. One of the names is Masato. But that was, even when I spent time with a group of people who are still quite remote, they're called the Matses, and they live between the Peruvian Amazon and the Brazilian Amazon. And it can be made from yucca. It can also be made from these different palm fruits like pifayu, ungarawi, but they're all kind of similar. They're very starchy kind of fruits or vegetables. But it's drunk with every meal. Every meal you drink this fermented beverage. Kids drink it, old people drink it, everyone drinks it. Every meal you drink this fermented beverage. And it was also not just drunk like in a daily way, but it was also drunk in a ceremonial way. Like you would have ceremonies where you would drink massive amounts of this because it has some alcohol. So you do need to drink a lot to really experience the intoxicative effects of it. But also in a ritualistic sense, it was used too. So it was seen as a foodstuff. It was seen as a medicine. It was seen as something that could also transform consciousness. So it was a very fundamental part of their lives. And in Europe, it seems like beer kind of served that same function, and it was very commonly used. And it's something that we often drink now, but we seem to have kind of lost the importance of it, or even the traditional knowledge of making it. Like there's an example in Belgium. You have these Trappist monks, and they still make the beer in the traditional way. And they also live off of that. I mean, that's like one of their main foodstuffs, and they're also in general quite healthy. So is that something you can maybe talk about, like just that idea of fermentation, why it's so important, and why in traditional societies? Yeah.
That's amazing that you're touching this. And then again, whichever culture you would go into deeply, you would find these examples or traditional ways of making it. Then for the Trappistas, I know that there was this a specific kind of part of the season where the water was high from the melting snow, and they would have these specific pools for the barley or oats, whatever which they were using for fermentation. They would put the water, the running water, into there, and it was kind of infecting or seeding the seeds, which would be later made into the beers. So there's like the whole cultural thing, when you have to do it, how you have to do it, who can do it, with which attitude, again, yeah, you can produce this food. This is, again, always part of the culture. Yeah, it's like the whole ceremony of producing the foods, with which attitude you need to chew this and then spit it out. Yeah, that you are making the feed for the tribe, for the health of the tribe and stuff like that. And I think that in many ways you can explain a lot with biochemistry, like why good thoughts would produce different milieu, or something like that. With the Trappistas and the beer, one of the things that we know that at certain points this was the only source of a drinkable liquid in the ancient medieval cities, because the water was poisoned by the fecal stuff. Yeah, so because a little bit of alcohol inside of this ancient beers, that was staying intact from infections, and this was the only source of drinkables, of something drinkable for life. Yeah, so you couldn't have water because a lot of infections were in there. So and with the fermentation, that's why people start to use it again and again, because by creating specific acidity or by creating specific level of alcohol, these bacteria and fungi, they are able to preserve food away from infections. Yeah, so this, I would say that for all of the cultures, the only explanation why fermentation stayed, because this was the means of survival. Our ancestors, they were not making up something extra just because it's tasty. Yeah? They were only taking these things because these allows us to survive. So it's in a way this start of interaction with microbes in forms of fermented food made us like really survive in different environments and stuff. So everything we know about Northern Europeans, that they were the first guys to kind of adopt the milk making and the cows. And when we take this ancient pottery, again, from dating from 5,000 years BC, we would see the first traces of fermentation inside the pottery. So they were fermenting milk. And then again, cheese. Yeah, so this, like, cheese was always like wealth. This was form of accumulating wealth. It's not the money, that's cheese. So that's the storage of milk fat for the times where you would have no food. So, and then again, that's the whole history of fermentation. This was maybe for the last 100 years. Cheeses are something like delicious with certain smell and stuff. But for the most history of cheese, this was the means for survival. This why we could have these bigger growing populations, because we learned how to preserve our harvest for a longer time, for the winters where we have no plants, where we have no milk, stuff like that. So again, this was like first approaches to biotechnology that humanity adopted. And this allowed humanity to survive in many areas. And I'm sure if you dig deeper, that would be the same for the Amazon. So the only reason they're adopting these techniques because it's making them survive certain waves of changing climates, of infectious diseases, other stuff. So that's really interesting. And then, for example, bread is a good example how industry changed the traditional approaches. So the traditional bread is whatever we call now the sourdough bread. It was always like this for hundreds of years, up until maybe beginning or like end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So you needed only flour, water, and salt, and you would create the conditions where the fermentation would start spontaneously from the microbes just living on the seed shells. And then together with the fungi, microbes were transforming flour into sugar, and then microbes were eating up sugar and making acids, like the lactic acids or other acids. And because of the CO2, the flour was getting bigger because of the gases. And then after 24 hours, we would put it inside the oven. The microbes would die for sure inside of the oven, but all of this acidic stuff would stay and ancient or sourdough bread, it smells with acid, but it also stays for a long time. It could go dry, but if you then soak it up in water, it would be good for eating again. So when we discovered that there is this baker yeast, one of the microorganisms, the yeast, which is inside the bread, it's actually somewhere around Louis Pasteur. These guys, they were like really taking everything into parts. That's again a Western approach of studying nature. Just like, let's disassemble that and let's see how different parts are working. So they discovered the baker's yeast, and they realized if we grow a huge amount of this baker yeast and then we put it into the flour, it would ferment the flour in 1 hour. That's very good for production. Instead of 24 hours, to make bread rise in 1 hour. So we adopted this technique of just adding a lot of baker yeast in the beginning for the industrial production of bread. But since the process wasn't long enough, we weren't producing much acid. So the modern bread, the baker's yeast bread, the industrial bread, is not protected by acidic environment. And if you leave it on the table, it could be covered with all of this infectious stuff. It could go blue, it could go green, something like that. Sometimes even in the shop, packed in the plastic, I could see it's already kind of covered with the microbial stuff, and it's not good for eating. So that's again an example how, without understanding, we tackled into traditional process, and we changed the food, which could be the medicine, into the food. Like, for example, now if you ask people globally what do you think of bread, they would say that's probably you should cut out the bread, because it's not good for your health, it's making you fat. But then again, if you're making the traditional, the sourdough bread, that could be 100% of your diet, and that could be nutritious, that could be with a lot of minerals, and that could be very good for your digestive health, that could kind of really take you from suffering of intestinal problems into really a better health. Yeah, but you just have to understand what you're doing. And that's with all of the foods, that's what we did. Because all of the foods, like for example, chocolate, yeah, we could hardly think that chocolate is something fermented, but when you are producing these cacao beans, before they turn into beans, you would put these cacao fruits into the digged out holes, and they would ferment there, and only after that you would have the smell and the taste inside the cacao beans. With coffee, it's the same. Yeah, even on the coffee plantations, when it's still with a green peel around, yeah, that's when it's fermenting. With all of the milk products, that's fermented. Like whatever you see now on the supermarket shelf, traditionally this was done as fermented food, and then we somehow started to make it just like much quicker. Yeah, because we were like on the run. The Western civilization is like you have no time. You have to run. You have to make it quicker. You have to make it more productive, more. You have to make more money out of that, out of the same way of the resources. That's how we turned a lot of the human culture of preparing foods together with the microbes. That's how we made it into the modern food, which is standard American diet. Now, the acronym for that is SAD, Standard American Diet. So they call it SAD food in a way. So that's where we are now. And a lot of, like, it's really interesting. It's really able, just by talking, to explain people, to change their attitude to food, to make it, like, to make them, like, really turn into different directions, to change their choices, because in the end of the day, you also have the choice. Yeah, whatever is like to buy a cheaper foods, to buy something like already prepared, or spend some time into preparation.
So
Essentially, the idea being for physical health that, as you mentioned in the beginning, that this idea of diversity in general is going to be superior to less diversity. So these indigenous people, they were using these processes like fermentation. They were getting food also in the wild, which was just probably naturally healthier, hardier. It was also involved in a system of competition, much as you said, like with this guy in Finland, like only the strongest survive, and so also in nature, like only the strongest survive. And so this shift to more of an industrialized food, where we're also not necessarily the strongest are surviving, like we're cultivating things not necessarily for strength, but for looks or appearance or size, or, you know, much as you said with the cows, for yielding higher quantities. And so in general, that lack of diversity, because we're kind of specializing and making things more and more refined. You know, even like refined sugar, it's being refined. You're taking a lot of things away from that final product. And then by doing that, you're getting a less diverse product in the end, which then makes you less diverse. Is that kind of a decent summary of that?
Yeah, I mean, and again, if you look into a lot of stuff, that's how we came from medicine into poison. Yeah, I mean, I've been in Colombia, and they have the coca leaves as a traditional medicine, which has its way of application, when you have to do it, in which amounts and sizes and stuff like that. But you can also refine it into the crystals, and that's when it's becoming poison. The sugar is again the same thing. The sugar cane is a beautiful plant, but when you refine into the sugar crystal, that's becoming like a bit of a poison if you don't know how to do that. So yeah, I'm really glad that you summarized it like that. That's probably like I was really studying some of the views of the South American Indians, and I came about the book called Waitico. So this is the way of thinking that there is this, the Waitico is like a disease, is like a virus. Traditionally, South Americans would say that someone inside of their tribe was going crazy, was doing strange stuff, and they would think that it's infected by this Waitico. And this Waitico, the description of that, the traditional description of that, was that you are starting to use and want more than you naturally need. That was more of this description. But then it's really interesting when the traditional people, the indigenous American tribes, when they saw the Westerners, the first Westerners colonizing the continent, they realized that these guys, they're totally infected by this virus of wanting more than you actually need. They realized that this is like the spread of this disease. So what you summarized, what you described, is our really hunt for more than we need. If we look into the caloric intake, probably the more we earn, that's the curve which we see, the more we earn, the more calories we eat. And in with the economically developed countries, we're actually consuming up to 70% more of our physical needs in terms of calories, just because we can, just because we can't afford it. That sounds like really crazy. We eat up to 4,000 calories, while we can burn, sitting on a chair, around 2,000 calories. And most of these additional calories, we call them empty calories. So these are in forms of alcohol and sweets. So it has no nutritional value, no vitamins, no minerals. That's just like sugar on sugar, sugar dissolved in water. that kind of stuff, and we only use it for pleasure of our sensory outputs or for some of the changes of our mood, for example. So this is again like and then again the industry is using this desire of having more inside the human. So you can imagine two of the companies, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, they were racing and creating drinks which would contain more and more sugar. And people would choose the more sugary drink. Then another company was producing more sugary drink. Then another would produce more sugar drink. That's how we came into these amounts of sugar. But then again, like I think you have seen it so many times with people on the dietas that's like really refusing the added sugar, refusing the processed food. After a while, you start to feel a lot of taste in the same food which weren't tasty for you, because just your sensory inputs clears off. Just because there's a lot of sugar, you don't feel the tiny sweet inputs from many other plants and food sources, because just like it's over the roof.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember the the first dieta I ever did, and at that time, I was quite interested in nutrition. I wasn't eating any refined sugar, but I still wasn't aware, I think, of how much sugar is even added to food. I mean, even if you take something like you go to the supermarket and you buy a kombucha, which, most people would think is quite healthy, the amount of added sugar that they're adding to that, it can be like half of your daily recommended value of sugar just in one kombucha. It might have like 20 grams of sugar in it, which is crazy. But I remember that first dieta, it was the first time where I had literally cut everything out. And after 2 days, I was pacing around my tambo, my little hut, like needing something sweet. I mean, I was literally like willing to like eat a block of wood if it contained any amount of sugar. Like that's how strong the craving was. So it was very interesting. One of the things that you mentioned in the beginning about the gut microbiome is also how it affects the mood or our mind, our intelligence, which seems like a field that more and more people are becoming aware of. And it was really interesting because, you also use this word diversity, which is, also interesting because it's become quite a catchword in a lot of societies now. But it also, it reminded me that like even in what we consider like Western European culture, we often trace those roots back to the Greeks. But even, you look at the Greeks and they really trace their roots back to the Egyptians, and, probably much before that is not even known now. But really that idea, even in like a Western educational system, was this idea of like a liberal arts education. And the idea behind that is that you have a diverse education. Like the Greek man, the Renaissance man, the educated man was someone who worked on his body, was someone who took math, who took science, who took astronomy, who took philosophy, who studied history. Like it was really this idea that in order to be intelligent, in order to be whole, that one really needed a diversity of thought, that they needed to understand things from different perspectives. So it's quite interesting. And, also when you're mentioning this idea that a diverse microbiome also affects our mind, our thought, our intelligence. So is that something you can speak more about? Because I think that's something that maybe some people are familiar with, but probably a lot of people not, that actually our mind is also affected by our health, which is determined by our microbiome as well.
And this is like really emerging field at the moment in the whole science. I was just like recently digging into the topic, which is called neurodevelopmental windows. So we know in terms of, for example, infant nutrition, that there are certain specific time slots in the human growth from the first 1,000 days, which are very much important for specific functions of the brain. Learning, motor activity, memory, that kind of stuff. And we can explain it up to kind of biochemistry, again, of synapses. So now scientists try to connect it with what's happening in the infant gut, for example. Some of the processes, because we see a lot of, like, for example, let's take an example of the C-section. Yeah, that's up to 30% of the modern babies in the Western world are coming into the world by C-section techniques. So they're not making their natural way through mother's vagina. So they're not populated with the vaginal lactic acid bacteria. So they're populated with skin bacteria. And more often they will have asthma, they will have different inflammatory diseases, or they will go atopic. But it's also what's discussed now that because the brain and the gut are developing simultaneously at a certain point. And whenever there is a problem in the development of the gut, it will have the inflammation, the brain will stop the development. So just by this, we see the connection of the developing of the gut and developing of the brain. So now again, we see a lot of this information about the toxicity of the gut. It's also in kids, but it's also in the grown-ups. For example, our attitude to eating meat has changed a lot. There has never been in the history of the humankind that there are subpopulations of people that eat so much animal protein. It's the whole industry now producing this animal protein. We eat it because it's like really, let's say, affordable and cheap, but it's also nutritious. It really kind of makes us not hungry. And we can allow ourselves sometimes to eat meat 3-4 times a day. And also how we eat it. Normally it's not really kind of finely prepared. We don't chew it enough. So this excess of the protein is after 12 hours, it's not digested and it's in our colon. That's where microbial life is located. And then when microbes get a lot of animal protein, which hasn't been digested and absorbed by the small intestine, the process happening with animal protein is called rotting. So it's rotting and it's producing toxic materials. And one of the world-known scientists, Ilya Mechnikov, this is the guy from 100 years ago. He was studying, he's a Nobel Prize winner, but he was also studying longevity. And he found out that his postulate was that we are poisoning ourselves from the products of rotting, which comes from our own intestine. 100 years after, with all of this modern technique, we understand that's true. That's what he's discovered. That's what's happening. Because excess of the protein, the same it will happen on the table if you leave it, it will rot. The same happens in your intestine, just because it's excess. And in our intestines, that's always a choice. It will either, if you have enough of food fiber, if you have enough of plant food, that will ferment and that will produce acidic state inside of the colon, which is protective, and it will produce a lot of acids, which are good for our nutrition. Or it will rot and it will produce even neurotoxins, which then will absorb, which will destroy your liver, which would make this effect, which is now called in the medicine a brain fog. It's like your thoughts are like milky. You cannot make a choice. It's hard to concentrate. You forget the words. It's like brain fog is really a modern symptom. So again, this influence of what's happening with your food together with microbes, this can also influence like that. So you can produce toxins, and this will influence your consciousness. But the most interesting aspect is neurotransmitters. So we understand that between two of the synapses, in this contact between of the two neurons, the information is transferred with neurotransmitters. Like serotonin and dopamine are some of the famous. Normally we heard of them, yeah. Most of the medicinal plants, they will work with the same receptors of the same neurotransmitters on the biochemical level. So like the altered states of consciousness, they're also created through this, because some of the plant-based molecules, they're really like these neurotransmitters for our neurons. So now we understand that bacteria in our bodies are really much involved into production and levels of these neurotransmitters. It's like serotonin, whatever, is like, we understand that something that makes us happy. Dopamine, something which makes us really motivated. And cutting edge of science now is, for example, the American company, which came just from a startup 10 years ago. What they're doing now, they discovered in the feces of the healthy people, they discovered the microbe which is tremendously improving serotonin production inside of the gut. So it's not producing it per se, but when it's contacting the wall of the intestine, some specific cells, enterochromaffin cells of the intestine, they start produce more serotonin. So in the experiments, they're in the phase 2 trial, so very close, maybe 3 to 5 years to market. What they're showing that this microbe can be used as the painkiller, and with certain patients that will work better than ketamine, which is just a benchmark for the pain-killing activity. So what they really state, that for certain populations of people who have chronic pain, we can use microbe as a medicine. We will put it inside the human intestine. It will live there and produce, in the interaction with the cell wall, it will produce serotonin, which would decrease the signal of the chronic pain, and you don't need to take opioids for that, as done in the US. So, I mean, that could be the whole revolution in the pharmaceutical industry, if you think about that. But it's also interesting that probably it's another attitude to medicine, yeah? You don't have to take this medicine every day. The microbe inside of you will be making this medicine for you every day. Yeah, it's maybe very hard to think of it commercially, yeah? Because for the pharmaceutical company, you are used to kind of selling it again and again. For the pharmaceutical companies, they really want you to be sick, because this will make their financial success. So here it will really change the attitude. Another maybe less known neurotransmitter is called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. That's something like soothing neurotransmitter. Like while serotonin and dopamine will increase the signal, GABA will decrease the signal. And normally it will make you like more calm, for example. But now we understand that in specific populations, like kids and early development, or very old age and dementia, GABA is tremendously important. Like if you will add GABA as a supplement, which is there in the form of a supplement, to kids with delays of, for example, speaking, it's a much higher chance that they will start speaking. Or if you will use GABA as a supplement for the old age, for somebody who has these initial stages of dementia, just forgetting words, like really hard to start remembering something, but not completely lost, then the symptoms will go away. And that's kind of science is there, and it's being used like that. They started in Japan in the 70s to use GABA for the old age, for example. But then again, GABA is produced inside of our body separately, but also GABA is produced by any lactic acid bacteria just naturally. 60% of these lactic acid bacteria will produce it. Whenever you make a sauerkraut or whatever you're fermenting and you have lactic bacteria there, they will produce certain amount of GABA. So when there is a higher level of fermentation, like you make it like really acidic, their level of GABA they produce will grow, will increase. So it's probably part of our neurodevelopment as a kids, may be attributed to very good acidic conditions in our gut. And the microbes who live there, they are kind of producing more and more of this GABA for us, which we use in the regulation of learning activities as a kids. It's like really interesting. Yeah, it's like somewhere in the evolution, it came to be that the microbes were producing some of these neurotransmitters for us, which we started to use for our psychic activities, for our brain development. And now when we destroy it, with the modern techniques, we will see the decline in the mental health. And one of the most killing example that I saw is interaction of the breast milk microbe and brain development in terms of chemical. So the normal breast milk, it would contain certain, it's called oligosaccharides. So these are sugars which are made up more than two sugars. So there is this lactose, which is two sugars molecule, like two different sugars. But when there is three, we call them oligosaccharides. And these oligosaccharides is the third, in terms of amount, the third component of the breast milk. And the baby cannot absorb these oligosaccharides. We have no enzymes to do anything with them. So these oligosaccharides, they are designated microbial food produced by mother and then transformed to kids. So mother, like the third element, so like this fat and protein is for the baby, and there's something for your microbes in every cup of the breast milk. So we will go there, and one of the elements of these oligosaccharides is called sialic acid. And the microbes would cleave this sialic acid, and it will be absorbed by the baby, and it will go directly into the brain. Like most of this sialic acid for the baby and for the developing brain goes inside of the brain. And then in the probably 20 years ago, they did the research with the babies on the formula versus babies on the breast milk. And the amount of sialic acid in the breast milk babies was 30% more. So this traditional kind of chain of feeding the baby is made in a way that you transport certain chemical in high amounts into the kid's brain. And this sialic acid, like these are two neurons, when they're contacted, this sialic acid is like really lining up these contacts. And it's like in a way maybe like insulation between two electric wires in a proper way, so that the electrical signal comes proper. And then again, if you think about that somewhere in the brain, a better connectivity of neurons is produced by the chemical which is transported from the mother's breast milk into the baby gut, then cleaved off by the microbes in the baby gut, and then through the blood is transferred into the baby brain. This is like, wow, it's like a really complex route of creating what we call intelligence then. And maybe to finish this topic, whenever we work with the patients with all of these digestive symptoms, we would see that one of the kind of accompanying symptom is an anxiety, or an anxiety leading to depression. And we think that it's chiefly from really microbial disbalances. So whenever we improve the microbial disbalance, we can make the anxiety go away. Now, I've been just recently looking at the statistics for Europe, for example. So this post-pandemic time, they are seriously concerned by depression. And it's probably number one debilitating reason now. It is bringing a lot of you can calculate it in billions, how many working hours or working days people are losing because of the depression and anxiety and connected mental health states. So we understand that high rates of COVID patients in certain countries, so the post-COVID syndrome is always connected with more depressed state where you don't have the wish to wake up in the morning. You don't want to stay from the bed. So that's again the neurotransmitters. And then when we go to the reasons of it, that probably the most damaged organ from the COVID is actually not the lungs. This is your mucus, which is like the main amount of mucus is your intestine. So the virus is actually damaging the interface of your communication with your microbes. It was already not good communication because of the food. And then after the virus, it's even worse. And we see these consequences a year or two after as the manifestation of debilitating disease, which is really attributed to mental health. So that's probably the area, and I've been talking a lot about it with the professional guys who are doing fermentation, who are teaching fermentation, who are in this topic of food fermentation for years now. And normally that's what they say, that's our community of people who ferment, also because that's a little bit, again, like a ceremony. You need to work with the plants from your garden. You need to have the attitude when you're cooking that you're really putting time and effort and your mood into that, and you're getting something which is really good for the health. And they say this community of people fermenting from all over the world, these people are much more calm. Like they would never kind of blow up in the expressions or of anger or something like that. Like most of the time you would have a better mood, if you are like normally around bacteria and fermenting. So this is one of the side effects of making friends with microbes. Just like more happy, like naturally a happier attitude to what's happening.
Yeah, that's a good transition. I mean, we are coming out of this kind of post-pandemic time where even people who maybe weren't so familiar with viruses, now even that word, it's very prevalent with people, this idea that there are viruses that can affect us physically, mentally. Even in the Amazon, where I was for many years, it's probably the biggest cause of death worldwide. I'm guessing behind, things like heart attacks and cancer, but is parasites, and specifically like malaria. I mean, malaria kills, I think, hundreds of thousands of people every year. It's something that in most of the Western world has kind of been eradicated, that specific parasite, the malarial parasite. But for much of the world, that it's still very prevalent. So is that something you could speak a bit about? Just that idea of viruses and parasites, and how those kind of come into that idea of the microbiome.
Yeah, I mean that's again part of the bigger world. Yeah, that's this external world of microbes, and through the history of humankind, we have all of this, like really the Spain flu, for example, in Europe. It's a great example of like something like really new, which happened to people, new disease, new infection, which appeared and really killed a lot. For South and Central America, this was like that with the colonization, this population was not prone to certain types of infectious diseases, sexually transmitted, non-sexually transmitted diseases, and a lot of indigenous people, like the whole cultures died off because of the new infections brought by Spanish conquistadors, for example. So that's always been there, I would say. Yeah, that's not something like just modern. That's with the plague, for example. It's always been there. And the more we are, the bigger we are, the more dense we are in population, starting from the first cities, the more prone we are to certain infections. Yeah, like our world interconnectedness, our global logistics, which we were enjoying for several decades before the pandemic, has just showed us how much vulnerable we are in front of the virus. Yeah, in means of days, the infection which started somewhere spread globally, and we couldn't control it, just because we are so much interconnected. And this has always been like this, but never up to these scales. Yeah, some of the diseases, malaria or tuberculosis, stuff like that, they are connected with the kind of state of the environment outside, the level of living of the population. And I would say that probably malaria, in a way, like how I see that, is formed by our mistreatment of the environment around. So if we would produce around ourselves beautiful gardens, then malaria would be in control. But because how we transform the nature, probably we're not thinking about it. So these hotspots for malaria, they stay. So it's, of course, we should take action now. We should use the specific chemicals to protect from malaria. We should kill all these insects which are transporting malaria. But if we think like more globally, that's just because how the nature looks, that it's unbalanced. And then we will see the result. In a balanced environment, there is no chance for specific pathogen to appear in high numbers. Starting from the medieval cities, yeah, there was just like a lot of waste, yeah, a lot of rats living off this waste, which was unmanaged, and this would allow the plague to kind of to infect so many people. So it's probably, from the historic perspective, that's always like that. The modern infections is just showing us from the perspective of nature, they're just showing us the limits Like the guys, you are going over the limits, and me, nature, I have the way to show you that it's too much. One of these examples was the swine flu. If you remember the times, the swine flu, it actually appeared because on the farm there was so dense, the swine and the birds, they were living too dense in very dirty conditions. And whenever it is like that, it is the home for new infections. It's where they're kind of cultivated and cultivated and cultivated, and certain time they break out from these prisons. So, and it happened. Like it's like because two different animals together in a very poor conditions, in very poor health conditions, then it is the condition where a new type of infection, a new type of virus, which is a flu but of a new type, can appear. And it can, like, next time it appears, that could be many times more deadly. Whenever people say that somehow COVID was made in a science lab, might think that it's maybe you're trying to indulge what we do, how we make the industry. Like, look at so many farming animals in such a poor conditions, where the disease is uncontrollably spread between the animals, and the sanitation conditions for them is really poor. So these are sweet spots or hot spots for new infections to appear, to develop, and then from there to spread. Yeah, it's like really we're living on a powder barrel. Yeah, sometimes we say it in our language like this, with what we do with animals, with what we do with waste, for example, with the organic waste. Again, we're also doing like that. So it's always, it's good that locally we're fighting with that and making new drugs to treat that, and making these drugs more accessible, but more like global thinking about that is really changing the whole approach to the environment that we live in. And let's say we're now in 2023. By 2040, we are expecting a climate change. And this means that in many regions, the temperature will be rising 1, 2, or 3 degrees. And then there are so many aspects of agriculture, for example, or forestation, or access to water. But one of the aspects we forget is the aspects of infections and microbes, because 2 or 3 degrees higher temperature annually in certain places would really change the microbial landscape totally. So 1, 2, or 3 degrees for microbes, that's sometimes ability to multiplicate like thousands times faster. And this means that in different areas we will have different infections which were not known for this area. I don't know if you've been to Asia, but like Asian infections are really something dangerous for Western people, yeah. So maybe if you were born locally, like for example India, yeah, very hot climate, a lot of deadly infections for human, but for the locals, there's the whole culture of eating, of treating, of surviving with that. And for example, like normal Indian can go and swim into Ganges, but you cannot imagine a Westerner to go and swim there. It's like literally after one swim in Ganges, he will have a myriad of different parasites living on him, and he's unable to kind of fight with him. Every now and again, I have people from my friends who says like, yeah, Dima, we've been to Asia. You've been warning us. That's not safe place for a long time. But we have this strange thing, like I'm all yellow, or I have this vomiting, or I have this stuff. So that will come more into colder places. And that's like also together with the human migration because of the climate. People will migrate. We will have climatic immigrants. So people who are just like running from the devastating heat. And this also means that infectious microbial landscape will change. And I'm talking a lot on different occasions with inside of the think tanks about like what should we do. And the only thing we understand that we cannot even prepare for that. We cannot pre-calculate the scenario. We just have to be ready for action when it happens. We have to be ready to kind of to act early. Yeah, we cannot even like think of what kind of drugs we need or what type of infection that will be. We just have to be kind of ready to go when it happens. Yeah, we have to be ready to deal with that when it happens, because it's the whole unknown world for humanity, and I'm sure we all will experience that in the upcoming years. What we have learned from the COVID pandemic, with all the statistics, that people with better health, and it's our normal understanding of better health, lower weight, lower blood sugar, better condition of the blood vessels, all of that stuff that we hear about every day, they have more chances for survival. And then again, coming back to the topic of diversity of the microbiome, they were comparing people and they were seeing the outcomes of the COVID. The people with a better diversity of the microbiome, they had much better prognosis on the COVID, and the people with lower prognosis, older age, they were having the worst prognosis with the COVID. That's like time in the ICU or chances of death or like recovery time from the COVID. It's really interesting. So the only the only preventative measure that we can do is staying in a better health. And then again, the practical advice for the microbial diversity is just plant diversity. Just eat up a lot of different plants, like nuts and seeds and leaves and tubers and berries and mushrooms and whatever vegetables themselves, that kind of stuff. Whenever you increase the diversity in the diet, the diversity inside of you will increase. Our ancestors, the hunter-gatherers, how we call them, they probably ate 400 to 500 different plant species a year, through the year, all of this seasonal stuff. When I was observing different indigenous people in different areas, I realized that it's like, from the childhood, they knew all of these different plants, not because they were taught by their parents, but just because they were trying all of that stuff from around. They were living inside the nature and they knew the taste. Like this one is bitter, this one is more sweet, this one you have to wait till it's yellow, then it's more soft. And it's like my own kids, when we go to the forest, they know certain types of leaves that they can chew, and they just pick them up naturally without even thinking. I think that our ancestors were like really living in nature like that. They were like walking around in the nature, and they were just like eating up different plants, not much, not digging them off, like some berries, some leaves, sometimes even branch of a tree for chewing would suit them. And that was their natural. Us in the Western world, in the Western city, you can imagine yourself walking somewhere on a London street and picking up a flower or a leaf, because first of all that will be covered with the dust and dirt from the cars and that kind of stuff. So we are only eating off the shops, and then it's also our habitual attitude to the food that we want to make it more unified. Yeah, for us the best solution would be the same food again and again, because we don't have to think about it. Like naturally we are not into diversity on our table. Yeah, that's the point. So the habit to survive in the upcoming microbial madness, you just have to put more interest, more attitude, more time, more consciousness on your dinner table for tonight to get more diverse stuff, more local stuff, to learn how to cook some of the stuff. That would be the answer.
You mentioned this really interesting idea in the beginning, which when I started working with ayahuasca really came to me. Because in a lot of these traditional cultures, they do speak of entities, of spirits, and there's also this idea of warfare, that there's benevolent spirits, there's malevolent spirits, and that a big part of work with medicine is bringing these things into balance, or expelling the malevolent spirits, calling in the benevolent spirits. And it's very interesting because, as you were saying, even kind of with like Pasteur and then some of those before him, up until recent times, and like even for a lot of Western people, that idea of spirits is very foreign. But even 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that idea of microbes was a completely foreign worldview, cosmovision. I mean, if you told someone that there's these invisible things that you can't see with your eyes that are causing disease or benefiting you or enhancing your intelligence or making you depressed or causing you anxiety, people would have called you a charlatan, a quack. And yet when this, instrument, the microscope was developed, then you could actually see that these things were there. And I think it's a really acute and interesting observation that perhaps, one of the ways of kind of translating that cosmovision of spirits or entities is that perhaps these people really were, actually far ahead of their times, that they realized that there were these entities out there that we couldn't see, that we couldn't necessarily see with our eyes, but maybe through some other application, because they didn't have a microscope, but they had maybe a plant that could alter their consciousness that allowed them to see things, that they were able to begin to kind of work through these things, to bring harmony, to harmonize things in that way. Is there anything else you can speak about in that, or maybe things you've thought about in that way? Another really interesting thing that I've thought about is even this idea of like alien intelligence, which is quite fascinating because just in terms of the very like natural laws of physics, of time and space, I mean, it's quite interesting, and it's something that I've thought of, that the nearest galaxy is something like 10,000 light years away. Which is just an unfathomable distance, almost insurmountable. And yet with certain things like plants that do alter our consciousness, those things like time and space begin to be dissolved, and that we are able to enter a communion or an intelligence with something else. And many people, when they are in those states, would say that they're communing, they're having a conversation with an intelligence that's somehow outside of them, or that may be inside of them as well, but that's not inherently them, that it's something other than them. And yet they're learning, they're receiving information, they're receiving intelligence. And I think even in that idea of aliens is like we anthropomorphize them, like we want to see them somehow as being somewhat similar to human. And yet we live on this earth where there is this other life form, which potentially is highly intelligent, the microbial universe. And it's exuding life. I mean, we're surrounded by this almost like alien life that we know very, very little about. And yet it has such a huge impact on our lives, and even makes us who we are, which is quite fascinating as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my personal thoughts are about what actually consciousness is. What's the physical basis for our consciousness, for example. Very much we understand, or like we have this theory that the brain and neurons connecting, like myriads of these neurons, like really complex network of neurons, is creating something which we call consciousness. And then we can alter the functions of these neurons, and we alter the functions of this consciousness. If when neurons die, we kind of lose this consciousness as we know it. So I was thinking a lot, is there anything beside the network of neurons which can also produce consciousness? And then there are a few examples in the world of stuff like that. So one of these examples is the network above, below the earth. Yeah, if you look at the forest, there is the whole network of roots of different plants, which they show now when somebody comes into the forest and steps onto the ground in one part of the forest. Through the communication, the whole forest receives the information that there is somebody else in the forest. So this is like, but this communication is much, much slower. The speed of transmitting the signal is much, much slower than from neuron to neuron. Like in our neurons, that's almost like light speed. So over there, because it's not only electric signal, but it's mixed signal of chemistry, physical, sometimes electrical signal. So it's just slower. So in a way, forest has its consciousness in terms of like information flowing and changing about the whole thing happening in the forest. But it's just like very slow thinking, maybe a few orders of magnitude slower. But it has its memory, it has its thoughts, it has its expression. So sometimes we would see that plants would connect to each other and help each other grow and heal and change. And there are different stages of this forest. Yeah, sometimes it would die or get old. Sometimes it would revive. It has the memory, a chemical memory of everything that happened with that. So, I mean, I'm like from the childhood, I'm very much attracted to the forests. Just like going there is a medicine for me. And then the microbes themselves, the community, they seem to be communicating also. They have the memory. Even the microbes in our gut, they will remember, like we can find the chemical memory of what's been happening with us from the very moment of our birth. And then they also store all the information of everything that happened to us. And they communicate with each other, and in a way they would have the same consciousness, the same thoughts, the same communication, but again that would be just much slower. So when you're mentioning these experiences of people of connecting with like seemingly other consciousness and also learning from them, for me I would say that it's maybe less about some aliens or some another dimensions, but it's maybe our ability to connect with other consciousness of nature, which have just different speeds or just different means of transmitting information, maybe not always electrical, sometimes through chemical, sometimes through physical connection. That would be like really interesting for me, maybe at some point to study. Whenever I was addressing this topic from scientific point of view, I was really understanding that we are not ready with the machinery to study. That's so much complex. It's like so much complex that we can make just first experiments and first steps. But that's amazing how we communicate also with the outer world, that probably our consciousness is never outside of the consciousness of the nature, especially with the indigenous people. Like these people, they live in the world of, for example, even fragrances. Yeah, like in the natural jungle, you would have all of these leaves evaporating, like really healing fragrances, yeah, like substances which influence you. For the insects, these substances are really like controlling. They're changing their mating behavior. They are changing their direction, where they go and how it would transform. We are it probably influences us as well, but a little bit like subconsciously we're changing our behavior when we go into the forest, into the jungle, like the way how we relax. Or like where I live, we have pine trees, and when it's midsummer sunny day, you go into the pine tree forest. It's just like a healing experience with all of the smells and fragrances. Yeah, and that's for sure. I mean, you could subjectively feel that it's changing your consciousness. So in a way, we are always connected to this information from the nature. We should be always connected. Yeah, we are designed to be always connected. That was guarding our survival again. That's why we are connected. That's means of the survival for us. The only thing we are doing now, that we are now many generations of the people who live in the cities, and a lot of kids, they only know plants from the pictures, yeah, or like from the small gardens somewhere. So we are like a little bit disconnected from the nature consciously, but maybe on the subconscious level, even this disconnection is even higher. Like we don't feel the natural fragrances of the plants from our area, but we have all of these fumes of plastic and plastic again, and combustion, other stuff. So no surprise we're going crazy in a way, yeah, when we live in the cities. Yeah, and then again, when we just go out in the healing environment of the nature, we're becoming connected to this. I mean, I'm all up to this Gaia theory. Like there is this global planetary consciousness as a layer of information. And me as a scientist, a lot of my thought has been provoked by just staying with nature, just living there inside the nature, staying there for a longer time. Even if there is this tradition of the vision quest, which is attributed to the like really ancient tradition of the, how do you call it, rite of passage. Yeah, so it's like when the human is becoming older human, how to initiate into the adult life. Different tribes would get different ceremonies, but they were all about putting a young human into the wild nature and making him connect with the wild nature through the prayer, through the silence, whatever it was. I believe it was in every culture, but a lot of cultures have just lost this understanding. And then over there, and it, like the staying there with nature was itself a medicine. It was attenuating this level of more conscious understanding and subconscious understanding with the information from the nature. And a human being would get a vision. That's why it's called a vision quest, would get a vision for a life, for what he should do. So, but it's a vision. What is a vision? That's just like a well-informed decision. Yeah. So to be well-informed, you need to connect to the global network of information, which is nature itself, through touching it, through seeing it, through just like putting your racing mind to a lower speed just to see what's happening. I remember my days on the mountain. at certain point, I would know the time of the day because of the bees coming. They were buzzing from the far, and I was like, this is the time of the day when bees are coming close to me, and they would stay there for some time and they would go. And this was my experience of time, not like something on my hand spinning all the time with a second after second, but it's like the flowing of the bees at their own speed. And this was my experience of time. Or I would wake up in the night and would see the moon moving on the sky, and this was my experience of time during the night. So it's a little bit like much the consciousness of the planet or of different planets, planetary natural subcommunities like forests, microbes. It definitely is there, and we definitely have all of the receptors, all of the capacities of really joining this, of experiencing this, but we need to be like a bit better prepared for that. We need to learn to observe it. We need to learn to feel it. And whenever we learn how to do it, whenever we dedicate time, whenever we have good teachers for that, we will see more and more from there. We will experience more of this connection. And then I think part of our health is just insanity of being lonely and disconnected. But and then it's so much inside the indigenous cultures, the philosophy of indigenous culture, that it has never, that you are never alone, that you are part of the nature, that you are so much interwoven with every process of the nature, with changes of the seasons, with changes of the day, with all of the plants, with all of the insects, with all of the animals. And by return, like for us Western people, whenever we return to this attitude to nature, it's a healing experience first of all, and it's transforming our way of thinking, experiencing, feeling. And I think that's how we are getting connected, like globally, consciously and subconsciously, to this Gaia experience. If we want to call it aliens, be it aliens, but I think that's just like more globally being more connected to life itself, because our planet is rich, is a treasure of a planet, is life and is diversity, and we can definitely experience it. Sometimes just like this power plants can give us a push into that, but ultimately it's just our attention where we put it. If we put it into seeing more and more of this connection with the nature, it will just like flow naturally into our thoughts and consciousness, up to the moment where definitely, as well as true indigenous people, they have no kind of limit where their consciousness end and the consciousness of the nature start. It's just like one design, one pattern, one beauty for them in the everyday, in the daily life. And this makes them like really stable, really robust in their mindset, in their mind health, but also in physical health, I believe. What do you think about that? Works for you?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing way of looking at things. A lot of these cultures, they seem to have these traditional practices, like like in Japan, they call it forest bathing, kind of like you were talking about, or this vision quest, this initiation, going into nature, having this experience with, you mentioned in the beginning the idea of the dieta, which is, very similar, kind of going into nature, isolation, restricting, not eating or fasting, and ingesting these plants, and kind of like, as you talked about, like something like tobacco, again, this fermentation process, how it affects the mucous membranes, how it goes into the digestive system, it affects the microbiome, it goes into the liver. Some of these plants like ayahuasca, and even there's been some research now about these ideas of neuroplasticity, of neurogenesis. And very much like you're saying, like traditionally they would speak about these ideas that these experiences, they allow you to see the world in a different way, which is where that idea of like this birth-death experience comes from, or death-birth experience, that like you're dying to an old way of being, the initiatory experience. The child is dying and being reborn as an adult, or the kind of the power plant experience. You're dying off to old ways of thinking, and you're stepping into a new vision. Maybe in more religious terms, it's like the Maya. You're kind of cutting through the veil and seeing the world as it actually is. Do you think these ideas of like neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, but because they are being studied by science, that there's more of maybe an interest or even a bridging of these worlds, and seeing that actually, almost in language, that they are speaking about very similar things, and that they're real in a way, that they have a very real impact that can be seen and measured?
Well, I mean, the studies of the brain, which are there now in modern science, are really important for our understanding of how our psychic is working. And the very basic understanding for me is this connection of trauma and neuroplasticity. Because trauma in itself, in terms of the brain, that's a conditional, like a reflex, like a reaction, which is, sometimes it's called engraving. So it's like engraved in your brain, these reactions. So something bad happened to you from a person who was wearing a bird and a yellow sweater. So you will react to everything with a beard and a yellow sweater as very dangerous, because that's a way of survival. So trauma is all of your conditional reflexes for all of the traumatic experience in your life. And sometimes for the adult person, there's so many traumas. Yeah, sometimes they're not life-death related. Sometimes that's because we are in society, and most dangerous for us is this social death. Yeah, social attitude, social trauma. We can make trauma in people with words. Yeah, that's how extensive we are. That's how far we are from this natural stuff. So a person with all of this traumatic experience, it's hard for him to move freely. Yeah, it's hard for him to think freely, because whenever he bounces another trauma, and he's like this inside of this pinball machine. He's just like bouncing of different traumas with his thoughts, and that's where we also say that the mind is racing. It's just racing because it cannot go out. Yeah, it goes there, like no, that's dangerous. This I cannot do. Like this painful. So, in terms of the brain, yeah, when we start thinking of something, there is this connection within the very internal parts of the brain, like very, very internal. Like this is our frontal lobes, yeah, and this is like very internal parts of the brain. Like sometimes we call it the lizard brain, which is like fight, freeze, and run reactions. Yeah, so we see, if we would look at the brain of a normal person with a trauma, like a normal adult, a Western adult, there's always some traumatic experience lightens, and it will cause a reaction. So in neuroplasticity, meditation, psychotherapy, just living through your trauma, what it creates, that from the frontal lobes, from the conscious thinking, you will have the neurons growing into this traumatic localization, and the trauma will light every time you will see the conditions close to those traumatic. But because you work through that, and you have the connection from the frontal part of your conscious mind, it will kind of extinguish the trauma with the neurotransmitters. It will soothe the trauma momentarily, like, it's okay, you're grown up. That's not that bad guy with a beard and yellow sweater. That's just like yellow sweater. There are a lot of yellow things over there. So in a way, the neuroplasticity is rewiring. We call this like really like changing the wires, rewiring your brain for different reactions. But in a way, the traumas will always stay with you, but you just react to them differently. It will always, the traumatic experience will always appear when you have it, according to the normal, like the modern neuroscience. You cannot erase it, but there are so many connections to the same region which will soothe it that you don't experience it as trauma anymore. Or you can even transform this energy, because that's the mind energy. When something lights inside your brain, that's the energy. You can even transform it into whatever, pieces of art, motivation, that kind of stuff. So it will light up the whole circles of something moving inside your brain, and you will have all of this yellow world, or you will become a barber which cuts the beards. Yeah, somehow it started with some of the trauma, but where it will lead you. Normally we try to kind of squeeze this trauma, not think about it, not go there because it's traumatic, and we try to avoid it. And then we have special how do you call them, the special chemicals from different lists, yeah, which help us to forget about the trauma when we get intoxicated, yeah, with alcohol or something else. Yeah, it's like that's our way of working with trauma. That's the normal way of working with trauma, just being intoxicated enough that we don't remember what the yellow is. No, we don't react to that. So that's another, like, neuroplasticity in working through that. That's another way. And here, I think that working with plants or just creating your health good enough to be able for this neuroplasticity, that's like additional therapy, adjuvant therapy, we call it. So this will work in synergy with what's happening in your life. Yeah. Again, you can work through that yourself. You can use psychotherapy. You can use different professions of people now there, like facilitators who help you live through that with different techniques. There are some traditional techniques like meditation, which is also so much connected with healing the trauma and neuroplasticity. That's what we see with all of these Buddhist monks, that their brains are rewiring even in the old age. Yeah, they have these capacities, because for a long time we thought that probably after 2025, brain is not changing much. It's only dying off. No, it's ever living matter inside of this box, and it can change if we want, and we can help. And our good health, like our good and diverse biochemistry, helps us to work with this brain better. It has more energy. All of these different experiences, even now that we've been talking now for 2.5 hours, I see. Yeah, but I also can compare my state from before and now. That's like, just because of thinking about or talking about something, I can feel more energy in the body, more energy in the mind, more different thoughts. Like I'm revisiting some of my old ideas, this is life of the brain. And then this is, again, what we feed to our brain is important, because the brain also has his own food. And in United States, there is this concept of integrative medicine or integrative approach to health. So all of the physical food that we eat is called secondary food. And the primary food is all of our vision, all of our sounds that we hear, all the ideas that we see, the sceneries that we visit, the people we communicate with. So this is our primary food. And depending on our primary food, the brain will work accordingly. Yeah, so we can, and this is what we consciously regulate. where we live, with whom we talk, what topics do we touch, and even if we are in a situation where seemingly we are unable to change what we see every day, but it's also our attitude that we can change to that. We can see different details. We can pay attention to different details, and we can choose or regulate our reactions to those details. This is how I see this rich life of consciousness connected with brain and neuroplasticity and brain development. One of the interesting topics now in neuroscience is about kind of connecting different parts of the brain together. So it's interconnectivity of the brain. So it's like brain can be more interconnected and more whole, or can be less interconnected. So a lot of practices, for example, like a lot of the spiritual practices, they show that we are building more and more interconnections with different parts of the brain. Loosely connected parts of the brain can even cause this effect of multiple personalities in the same person, which is like more obvious, close to madness and mental disease. A lot of physical activity when we are, so it's like really interesting, this part of the brain which is connecting other parts, that's like the brain stem, let's call it, and it's bigger and wider, and it's more thick, and it's more connecting other parts with people who do meditation, for example, or with people who really do something conscious with their body, like elite athletes or people who do bodily practices, who learn how to control their movements, like in the Qigong, for example. It's also like interconnecting your brain. And for me, this is like a concept of being more whole as a person. Yeah, of like making sense of all of your experiences in life, of everything that happened, not putting it into the black box somewhere in the whatever cupboard of your life, all of your skeletons in your cupboard, just like really making friends with them, making sense of that, putting it all together. This is like you are becoming yourself a more interesting person for yourself and others, for communication with the world, when you are more whole. This is what we say, that the person is more complete. He is integrated. That's how we call it. A phase of integration of the experience in one piece. And on the physical level of the brain structures, we also see the same thing. And very important that it's not connected with age. That we can start doing, and we should continue doing it through the whole lifetime, putting it together. I work with clay a little bit, and there is this first stage of working with clay that you need to kind of let the air out, and you really need to work with that. So I always imagine that's my brain, that I need to massage it all of the time to make it more like to create a better shape after. I have to really put it together, like really make it soft, like really make it work. Otherwise, when it's kind of stalling, when it's not moving, this is where probably problems start. This is where you get stuck in certain experiences, life conditions, that kind of stuff. I mean, there is no way we can probably secure us from different life conditions and things happening, especially when world is becoming more and more turbulent. The only thing we can do is make us more adaptive to that in terms of physical and mental health. That's for sure. That's what I think you are doing with this podcast over here.
You wrote a book, a children's book. Is that something you can speak a little bit about? And one of the things that I saw in the kind of the description of it, which I think is really important, and also that we forget, I think sometimes in a lot of our cultures, is this idea that the highest form of intelligence is that when you can relay something to a child, that's true mastery over it. And I think in a lot of our cultures, we've really forgotten that. And there's something very, not only noble, but important about just education and children and passing things down, and also this idea of intelligence, initiation, a lot of the things we were actually talking about.
Yeah, for me, this was probably one of the life-changing events when we started to. I mean, it just came out of the blue. I was already like a renowned scientist in the field of microbiome, and then there was this idea that probably we can write a book for kids. We have like friends who can create the ideas, what we should talk about. It was me and my friend from the childhood. We were working together. His wife was really good painter, artist, who could create all of the kind of cartoon stuff around, and another friend who was good with the literature. She was helping us to put it into story, and it was so easy to create. It was amazing. We were just like fountain of different ideas, what we should tell kids about, what's the earth, how microbes appeared, what they're doing in different parts of our body. This was like, and we were also having fun doing that. Like, okay, in the end we had a rap battle between good and bad microbes who were like really like reading rap, and who's the best rapper wins the intestine, that kind of stuff. So it's just like a lot of fun. And when the book came out, I realized that this can be the effect. I think worldwide we are somewhere maybe 50 to 60,000 books in different languages. I think it's English. I know that we did Spanish translation, but it never got published. But we have a book on Amazon. It's called Team's Adventure in the World of Microbes. I think we had it somewhere in Eastern Europe and even in China. And then we started to get feedback from kids and parents. And I was getting a lot of these videos where a child was just like together with a book all the time, putting it under the pillow, that kind of stuff. One of the parents wrote us like, after your book, our kid doesn't want, like for the New Year gift, for the Christmas gift, he doesn't want Sony PlayStation, he wants a microscope. And this was like, for me, it was like, wow, like that was fun writing it. But now what's happening with the kids? And this is like really what I realized, that kids, somehow they have this built-in radar. They understand when somebody grown up is like really genuine in how they explain something. And I believe that kids are able to kind of see the fun that we were having telling the things, or like the simplicity or the beauty, or how we worked on the pictures. The concepts are really simple. So good microbes are microbes that are eating vegetables. Bad microbes are microbes that are eating sugars and sweets and stuff. And sometimes parents would write that, like the book for my kid, the book is working like a hypnosis, because he threw away all of the candies, and he's insisting that he needs to eat more vegetables now, because inside of him are good bacteria, and he doesn't want to get sick if his feet are wet next time in the street, something like that. So it's like really building logical connections from your food through your microbes to how you feel, that kind of stuff. So this, I mean, the whole experience started the whole area of my activity. And now here back at home in Russia, I'm probably one of the top 10 science communicators. So I'm popularization of scientific thoughts on aging, microbes, nutrition. This connected me to so many great minds in the industry of food, for example, through their kids. Again, they were like, wow, we read your book for the kids. Amazing book, by the way. Like, we're also thinking of making like more healthier snacks. Do you want to advise us? Can you work with us on that? Can we make it even better than our initial idea? So this was like really something probably which had to happen to me one day, and it just happened, and it's part of my really like a daily life. And probably every now and again I would visit a school or a kindergarten and work with kids on the topic of microbes. Normally I make it in a way of a seminar, like a scientific seminar. I really encourage and empower them. I say that we're now all scientists and we have some of the ideas to discuss, and you will be able to kind of shout out your hypothesis, your ideas, what you think about that, how this might work, that kind of stuff. So I start talking to kids like really with a lot of dignity and really giving them credit. Like, all of their crazy ideas can be there. That's called science, and that's called scientific hypothesis. We will put all of them on the blackboard, and then later we will discuss. And also, one of the things that I realized, and one of the things whenever parents are there watching what's happening, I first of all when I ask kids, very often parents try to answer and I'm just like asking, guys, just watch what you're doing. You're doing this all the time in the daily life with your kids, but just give them time to answer. They know everything. You don't need to show that your kids know this topic the best. Just let them speak freely. And in the end, parents would see that kids are smart in their own way. They're smart in the way how they can process the information and think about it, and how together, like a group of 10 kids can come up to very beautiful ideas. Like, everybody knows a little bit, like everybody could add up to the collective idea, the final goal where we are going to. And it's really interesting. That's another way also of teaching, because I don't give them information to memorize. I ask them question, and we're discussing which of the hypotheses do you think will work better, which looks more like the truth, something like that. And I realized then when you give kids a chance to come up with their own ideas, they will use these ideas much better. Yeah, they will stick to them in terms of principles of their own health, just because it's their ideas. Yeah, that's probably why we all have a lot of this information about how to live healthy. Yeah, like apple a day keeps a doctor away. A lot of this different information, but it's not ours. That's not our invention. We just heard it, and that's like outer informational buzz. But if you are able to create a learning environment where somebody discovers something, and that's probably something, again, which is happening in the ceremony with the grown-up people, in the healing ceremony. They come up with their own ideas about their own life. That's why it's also working much better than them working with a psychotherapist who will interpret something for them. But this is like our own insight, our own aha moment about processing stuff. So for like every time after spending 2 to 3 hours with kids, I come up so much myself, I appear so much recharged, because they are, in a way, they're so much easy to communicate than the grown-ups. They don't have so many stiff ideas and garbage. They're momentarily into the topic. They're genuinely interested. Yeah, they're like really into that. And it's like 2 to 3 hours of like intense, just like work and communication around the topic. If you manage to kind of create this environment, that would be amazing. And that's, again, that's another way of healing for me. It's just like going out and staying with kids. And even I started working with kids much before I had my own kids, and now it's always with my own kids, like 2 to 3 hours, just diving into their world again. This like totally recharging myself, totally reloading the software, like you're a new person after that, because you also, this is again how brain is working. Yeah, it's always with with the mirror neurons. That's one of the modern understanding with the kinesiotherapy. With the work of the mirror neurons, we are mimicking the mimic. Our micro mimic will read the guy in front of us, and we will create the same facial expressions a little bit like the person in front of us. And when we are with stressed out grown-ups most part of the day in the daily city environment, then of course we have empathy for them, but also we accumulate this brain images of really sad, anxious people. But if you go out with kids who are just like happy, yeah, then in a way you're reading these micro things of happiness, and you're recharging your brain with this stimulus of just genuine happiness, joy of life, just because it is there, something new. Let's dig into that. Let's put it into parts. Let's assemble that again. And I mean, in terms of health, if you think about it, kids is just a bunch of new cells which have not accumulated toxicity. That's very fresh brain with not so many traumas, and is experiencing life as kid experiences it. Is like really teaching you something about what's real health. Yeah, I believe that we don't get old. Yeah, that we're just like accumulating a lot of toxical stuff on the cellular and mental level. And otherwise we would be just like running around 24/7, enjoying life, studying something new, finding out like really this surprise about everything, like, wow, that's a new whatever, I don't know, stuff, something new, how it works. Oh, you can unscrew that and screw that up. Wow, like this is so genuine from their side. This is what I'm learning from them. And that's, I think that also on the cultural and or like a conscious level, that's part of the nature that we as a humanity, we will be extended in next generations of our kids, as well as we are extension of our ancestors. And they all, like our ancestors, they had their prayers, and that prayers that wish for a better life for the next generation has really created a world that we live in. And in many ways, let's say it's a better world. They were trying to make it better. They were trying to make a better condition. So I see that as one of the like inherent mission. It's a part of the consciousness, the same way as a tree is producing a seed in it, also inside the fruit, which is like ripened and is made, that the seed will grow into a next tree. In a way, this is the same process of replication of things happening again and again, like a cycle of life that will happen. Like this life tree is something like a good image of that we have the roots, but we also have, like, we are at the moment, we are the trunk. Yeah, we as generation, in our, like when we are parents, we are the trunk. Or even if we don't have the kids are always around us. We are the trunk, we are capable of doing stuff, but there are also branches, and there are trees and seeds and fruits. And also it's like, I think it's part of a natural consciousness that we've been talking before, and this question so much connects with that it's probably impossible, yeah, to live without this connection to the kids, because it looks insane. It looks unnatural. It's beyond the natural understanding of life, beyond this change of generation. And yeah, I feel I have to stop now.
Mhm. Well, beautiful, Dima. Maybe to begin to wrap things up, do you have any recommendations or resources if people are interested in kind of building a more diverse microbiome? Like how would they go about doing that?
Uh, well, I think that there is a lot of popular literature in English that you can get access to, or in any of the languages. I would definitely recommend just going and getting grip of the things over there. A lot of these TED Talks, for example, there are a lot of very good TED Talks on microbiome that you can learn if you're interested. Whenever you go, people will again and again talk about the same stuff again and again, and it doesn't matter who will reproduce it, yeah, in terms of information, that the microbiome is there, that there are parts of food which really poison the microbiome, and there is the plant-based food, the fiber, the food fiber, which is the food for the microbiome. There's normal recommendation of eating more vegetables, like 5 portions of vegetables. That's the equivalent of amount of fiber from the 5 portions of vegetables that you need to get every day. And if you get it enough, you will get a regular stool, like an everyday stool. That's the whole diagnostic. You look what's on your plate. Is it diverse enough? Do you have 30 to 50 plants every week? Do you have rainbow color on the plate? You eat it up. Do you have the regular, the normal stool, which is not liquid, which is not like hard and it doesn't work, and constipation? If it's working for you, then you're like, okay, basics of microbiome is done for you. Then you can go further and you can look into different external bacteria which will help you inside. This can be either in terms of probiotics, which is kind of pharmaceutically produced microbes, but they're mostly extracted from human or different plants. Or you can look at the fermented food. You can find a local producer, like some very good project I was working in Berlin with are guys called Ferment. So it's like ferment, but with the word playing around the word fair. And they started as a garage, doing kombucha, doing yeast as a supplement, or producing the kefir grains and spreading them. But from the very beginning, I think it's up to 30% of the people working there are people with, I don't know what's the proper word, not to be politically incorrect, with different health disabilities, with different limitations. And that's why they call it fair. And you can get everything from them with a fair price. So again, you can buy already prepared kombucha without sugar, without added sugar, importantly. Yeah, so that's the taste of the kombucha. Or you can get this kombucha producing mushroom, we call it, yeah, kombucha producing substance, and produce it yourself. Yeah, that's also good. And they were like, I was coming to them annually for several years, and the production was growing because people were supporting the whole idea that this is like very very good business in itself. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs in different countries who are starting these businesses working with fermented products, sourdough bread. I mean, if you for the listeners, for our audience, if you haven't tried it, or if it's not your regular basis, just try to find a baker. And now it's like in most places you can find that. Get to know it. Yeah, just getting to know your food. Who is growing that? Who is baking that? That's also so much important, because like with one of the medicine people, I remember I was talking with one of the medicine people, and that's what he said. He said that if you know who grew the plant, how it got to you, with what attitude, the whole chain of medicine coming to you, and how to use it, and the reason to use it, and the way to use it, and the ceremony to use it, then it's a medicine. But if you don't know, then it's just like a recreational drug. And this is the whole difference. And the same will be about food. The same will be about food. Food can be a medicine, but if you know how it appeared, who is producing, who are these people, what's their attitude, what's their thoughts when they're getting the crop, the harvest, yeah, who is transforming this, who is bringing that. Like if you are really more attentive to this chain, which is bringing food to your table, like really from farm to fork, the concept, if you really get into that and see more into that, then your food is transforming more and more into medicine. Because otherwise, that's just like pre-packed something which you throw into the micro oven and then you eat it while driving to the office. That's probably not the medicine at all. That's the worst way how to do that. I was recently on the interview with a priest, and we touched the base of this topic of putting a prayer into the food before you would actually eat that, which is there in traditional cultures all over the world. And from the point of view of the physiology and digestive system, while you are slowing yourself down, you're actually switching your nervous system from the fight-flight mode into resting mode, which is totally different which works totally different in terms of digestion. And the same amount of food you will eat with a slower speed, and you will get much more for your health. A lot of food that we are eating, like while binge watching the TV shows, that we just like, our body doesn't even understand what happened. Yeah, it's like, what was it, food, or was it what? Should we digest it, or should we kind of throw it away? That kind of stuff. So a little bit more consciousness and attention in every step will make your food into the medicine. And there is a lot of information about that there, and there are so many people around. I would definitely recommend finding a live person, not the online person, to get into that. Maybe also to learn how to make certain foods. That's not rocket science at all. Yeah, you just need vegetable, water, and salt, and your own hands. That's enough for creating fermented food, which will be there in 2 to 3 days. And then that's the whole journey. That's how our grandmothers, for sure, and maybe sometimes grandmothers, were working with foods day and night. That's amazing connection to the human culture of cooking and a sustainable health.
Yeah, great. Well, Dima, this was amazing. Are there any subjects that we didn't touch on that you'd like to talk about before we wrap up?
I think I've been here and there, everywhere mostly. That was amazing company, though it's online. Yeah, you're a good listener, and you're really guiding into the spots where it was really interesting to talk to. And it's also like, for me, from our conversation almost into 3 hours now, this is like really understanding how the science and tradition and modern and ancient can and should be connected with different people around the globe, that we should really bring it together and make sense of it, because that's the main effort, like really put it together into one piece more and more, not making it like a total soup of it, yeah, not mix it in a ways that is unmixable, but also like making sense. And from whichever side in this conversation we were approaching the topic, that really made sense, and one topic could flow into another. That was amazing experience for me to talk on so many different stuff, but really coming back into the one root, to the one core.
There's a beautiful prophecy from a group of people in the Colombian Amazon, and they say this is the time of the Diro Amasa, which they kind of translate as the children of the new dawn. And they say we're in a time of people who can really take the medicine of the four directions to create a new Maloka, which is like a new earth, a new way of being. And yeah, that's as you were kind of saying before we started, that's a big part of this podcast, which is really to speak to people like you who are doing that, and to bring these different medicines together, because, at the root, medicine is medicine. It's not bound by time or space or culture, but it's really, it's been said very beautifully, like truth is one and paths are many. So how do we take all this knowledge that's out there and really, create something new and beautiful with it, based on tradition, based on science, based on knowledge. So I thank you very much for your part in doing that. I think you're doing beautiful work and super important work, and work that's really needed, and that really is going to help to change the world, person by person and culture by culture. If people are interested in, I don't know, reaching out to you or reading your book, are there ways they can, best ways they can, get access to that book, or any other resources that you have, or contacts?
Yeah, I think we can leave it under the video. Yeah, some of the links to the kids' book in English. I think it's still on Amazon. I'm not really connected to publisher now. Yeah, and you can have my Telegram connect whenever you have some of the ideas. Sometimes the beautiful thing about the interviews like that, there will be people like really wishing to reach out with certain questions or ideas, and like more and more of the beautiful communications come after that. I will definitely send this video to a lot of food guys in UK I was working with, so it's like really warm greetings to those guys. Like in UK, the whole culture of creating new fermented food was really booming when I was living in London before the pandemic, and I think it's still there, and it's really growing. It's amazing how it's transforming the whole attitude to healthcare. Like, there are so many people who really don't want to get into the healthcare system, and they understand that they can do that with their food. And this is like really great thing, that food can be the medicine. It is already there. It's already there with the people who do that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, my friend. This was a pleasure, and another shout out to Sophia for bridging that introduction.
Hope we see
and
when you
shouting.
come to travel. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, I hope to meet you in person, and I think that will happen. And I wish you all the best. And thank you so much again for this interview. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really enjoyed it. It was beautiful to sit down and talk to him. I think we got into some really fascinating topics, and I hope you enjoyed those. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month, and the different tiers you can sign up for give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. As always, to all the patrons, to all the people supporting that way, thank you very much for your help. I really appreciate it. And if you're able to do that, thank you very much in advance.
Also, if you're able to help with the algorithms to get the show out to a bigger audience, spreading it via word of mouth, or if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, that's a really big help. And then with the audio versions on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, following the show, leaving a starred rating and a short review is also a really big help. I should have some interesting guests, hopefully as always, coming on. I'm trying to arrange an interview with a local Quero guy named Victor. It's been a little challenging getting that lined up, but hopefully that will come up. There's a woman who I'm going to interview in a couple weeks named Kat Courtney, who has a really wonderful practice, website, Instagram channel called Plant Medicine People. So she'll be coming on. And then also another woman named Lila Lieberman, who's done some really beautiful work on traditional healing cultures, traditional shamanic cultures, and speaking about that. So those are the next guests I have lined up. As always, thank you all for all of your support. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode.
Dum